something a little different. A special video for those of you out there who enjoy ASMR mixed with a good scary or spooky story. I wanted to read some short stories out of one of my favorite books I've had since I was young. The book is called Strange Mysteries, Ghost Hauntings, and Mysterious Happenings. A book published back in 1992 by author Phyllis Raybin Emert. I bought it once upon a time at one of the scholastic book fairs we used to have in school. Remember those? I loved getting there early just to try to purchase as many scary or new goosebumps books I could find. Please be advised that these stories in this book are from 1992, so I'm aware that some of the facts might have changed within the years. I will be doing 2 parts to the video, and I hope you guys enjoy it. But before we start, as always, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more upcoming creepy and scary content. Let me know in the comments down below if you would like to see more ASMR related videos. Let's begin. Strange Unsolved Mysteries presents Ghost Hauntings and Mysterious Happenings by Phyllis Raybin Emert. The Whaley House. It's been called one of the most actively haunted houses in the world. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the state of California have officially recognized the Whaley House as a genuine haunted house. Located in Old Town San Diego, the 2-story mansion was built in 1856 by city pioneer Thomas Whaley. In addition to being the residence of the Whaley family, parts of the house were also used at various times as a county courthouse, a church, a post office, a public school, and home base for a theater group. The last Whaley to live in the house was Lillian, who died in 1953 at the age of 89. Today, the house has been preserved as a historical museum and is open to the public. Strange unexplained incidents began happening in 1960. These were noted in detail by Jean Reading, the curator and chief historian of the Whaley House. Footsteps, piano music, and rapping noises have been heard. Visitors have seen strange lights and moving objects. Some people have smelled strong odors of perfume or cigar smoke. Others have felt cold spots or mysterious touches. A number of people claim to have even seen actual ghosts. One person reported seeing the figure of a small woman in a long hoop skirt. Another saw a man in an old-fashioned dress. A ghost dog has been spotted from time to time, and the noises of a baby crying have been heard. In the 1980s, a young woman who worked as a tour guide at the Whaley House told everyone she wanted to see a real ghost. "Be patient, Denise," said Jean Reading. "It can be dangerous saying things like that out loud in a house like this. The walls have ears," she added. One Christmas, some visitors to the mansion heard the sound of footsteps. Jean and Denise went upstairs to investigate the vacant second floor. In the main bedroom, the women discovered 2 windows wide open. "I'm sure these were shut," thought Jean. Apparently, the horizontal bolts on the windows had been pulled back by unseen hands. As they walked over to check on the nursery, a man's voice suddenly boomed out with laughter. Denise grew pale, and she turned toward Jean, who stood frozen, unable to move a muscle. Finally, Denise whispered, "Let's get out of here." Both women bolted down the stairs. Did they hear the laughter of Thomas Whaley? Maybe so, but the exact place where the mysterious events occurred was above the location of an old execution site. A man named Yankee Jim Robinson was hanged at the very spot on which the Whaley House was built. If ever there was a restless and angry spirit, Jim Robinson was the one. He had been arrested for stealing a boat and was sentenced to hang by a drunken judge. Jim didn't believe they would go through with the execution because it was too much and a harsh sentence for the crime of theft. He thought it would be called off at the last second, but unfortunately, it wasn't. To add insult to injury, Janky Jim didn't die instantly of a broken neck, as do most victims of hanging. He dropped only a few feet and hung there for 30 to 40 seconds before he finally strangled to death. Some say the heavy footsteps heard in the Whaley house are those of the ghost of Yankee Jim Robinson. The spirit of Thomas Whaley is also restless. When he was alive, part of his home was used as the county courthouse, and Whaley was paid $65 a month for the privilege. The county records were stored there for several years, but as time went by, large portions of the population of Old Town shifted to a new area called Newtown. The people of Newtown wanted the courthouse moved to their area, but Thomas Whaley refused. The people of Old Town supported Whaley and vowed to fight the citizens of Newtown. When Whaley was away on a business trip, his opponents came to the house at midnight and forced their way in, holding Mrs. Whaley at gunpoint. They took the county records and left. When he returned, Whaley was infuriated at what had happened. For 19 years, he tried to get the county to pay the remaining months on their lease and reimburse them for the repairs on the building required after the break-in. But the case was never settled. Whaley died in 1890, angry and bitter over the injustice of the situation. Other ghosts haunt the mansion. The small woman seen by many visitors is probably Thomas's wife's Anna, who was only 4 feet and 11 inches tall. The crying baby is very likely the spirit of a 17-month-old Tom Whaley, the son of Thomas and Anna, who died in the upstairs bedroom of the house. Many have seen and been frightened by these strange incidents at the Whaley house, but no one has ever been harmed or injured. This well-documented haunted house continues to attract visitors year-round. The Haunted Battlefield. Such a beautiful and peaceful-looking place, said the English woman. She had ridden a bicycle from her hotel to the Scottish Highlands to see the pass of Killiecrankie. It's hard to believe this was the site of so much blood, pain, and death, she thought to herself. Surrounded by high cliffs, she gazed at the narrow rocky valley below her. It was a lovely day, and not a cloud was in the bright blue sky. As the afternoon wore on, the woman recalled the history of the area. In 1689, there was a terrible battle in the pass between English soldiers and Scottish Highlanders. The English had removed the Scottish king, James II, from the throne and had replaced him with Mary and her husband William of Orange. Scotland still supported James. At Killiecrankie, the Scots won a total victory over the British, slaughtering the redcoats to the last man. After the battle, the Highlanders stripped the bodies of all valuables and killed any wounded. Killiecrankie was the only victory for the Highlanders, who were eventually overwhelmed by the British forces. The woman sat down in front of a tree and looked all around her. Does the land see and remember, she thought. I wonder. It was fall, and the sun had dropped in the sky. The woman felt a chill in the air, but she was so relaxed, she didn't feel like moving. I've got plenty of food in my picnic basket and a heavy coat, she thought. I think I'll spend the night here and bicycle back to the hotel in the morning. She leaned back against the tree, closed her eyes, and eventually fell asleep. Hours later, she woke up at the start. Was that a fairway thunder she heard, or the sound of guns? The moon was so bright that she could see by her watch that it was 2 a.m. Suddenly, She heard noises erupt throughout the valley below her. She watched as an unbelievable scene unfolded. A large group of red-coated soldiers and their horses and pack mules gathered below. They groped for their guns and seemed to be in total disorder. When the woman looked up, she saw the reason for their confusion. Swarms of Highlanders screaming the name of James II descended on the redcoats. The huge band of Scottish warriors carried swords and shields against the English flintlock guns and bayonets. Shrieks and cries filled the air as the British were slaughtered. Their guns were no match for the Scottish fighters. Horses panicked, and soldiers begged for mercy, but there was none. Men were butchered, and the ground turned red with their blood. The woman was horrified and couldn't speak. The battle was totally one-sided. Finally, unable to watch any longer, she sobbed and covered her eyes. Then, a silence fell all over the valley. Moments later, she looked up. Bodies and limbs were strewn everywhere. A few men, still alive, moaned in pain, while others simply cried. The English woman smelled the scent of death in the air. Living people moved among the bodies. They pulled the clothes of corpses, taking shoes, belts, and buttons. A young woman scavenger, carrying a basket and a dagger, did her work not far from the English woman. One soldier, barely alive, moved slightly as the woman tried to take his wedding ring. Without hesitation, she bent forward and slit his throat. The English woman cried out. The scavenger turned, looked directly into her eyes, and began moving slowly toward her. No, no, the English woman screamed in her mind, but she was so frozen with fear that she could not speak. As the young woman with the dagger leaned close, the English woman lost consciousness. When she opened her eyes, it was daylight. She was alone and cold. The passive Kelly Cranky was beautiful and peaceful once again. There was no sign of the bloodshed she had witnessed. Shivering, she slowly pulled herself up, climbed onto a bicycle, and rode back to the hotel. When she told the staff what had happened, they nodded their heads. Over the years, others have seen the awful things you saw, said the hotel owner. The past is haunted. Too many died terrible deaths there for the spirits to be at rest. Others may say the English woman just had a bad dream that seemed real. It's only natural that the battle was on her mind as she fell asleep under the tree. But those that live near the site of this bloody battlefield believe that the land was witness to so much death and destruction that it can never erase the pain and violence. Do images of past battles replay themselves again and again? The English woman thought so. How about you? Rosemary Brown. The 19th century composer and pianist Franz Liszt first came to Rosemary Brown when she was 7 years old. At the time of the visit, however, he had been dead for more than 50 years. According to Rosemary, Liszt declared, "When you grow up, I will come back and give you music." Years later, beginning in 1964, Rosemary, who lives in England, began communicating with a group of famous composers from the past. In addition to Liszt, they included Chopin, Beethoven, Bach, Brahms, Schumann, Debussy, among others. These men supposedly dictated musical compositions to Rosemary, who wrote them down in manuscript form. Then, with the help of her spirit friends, she played them on the piano. "She's doing it herself," stated many non-believers. The music was analyzed by experts. Rosemary took psychological tests, intelligence tests, and musical tests. People investigated her background, her friends, her neighbors, and her musical training. They found that Rosemary was a normal person of medium intelligence with a very limited musical background. She had taken some piano lessons, but stopped after a while. Bored since childhood, musician. Perhaps she had advanced musical training and then an episode of amnesia, which made her forget, he suggested. Rosemary's family doctor stated that that was nonsense. As a child, she did have many psychic experiences. She often saw the spirits of dead people and realized at a young age that she had special powers and abilities. In 1969, the British Broadcasting Corporation, BBC, did a documentary on Rosemary and her music. As a test, she sat down at a piano with BBC staff present and waited for Liz to put up an appearance. In a matter of minutes, Liz was there, dictating a new piece. It was very difficult, with 6 sharps and different rhythms for the right and left hands. The completed manuscript was too hard for Rosemary herself to play. One of the BBC officials, who was an excellent pianist, was able to play it. He said, "Mrs. Brown, I think you get something here." The piece was then analyzed by an expert on France. He stated that it was definitely a characteristic of the great composer. Rosemary had performed in a similar way with other composers who communicated with her. She sits at the piano and with great speed writes down what they dictate to her. Each completed piece is written in the exact style of that particular composer. Rosemary Brown is a gifted and talented musician, some experts say. "Not true," replies Rosemary. "I'm only the link to these great men. They dictate the music, and I write it down." How can it be proven that Rosemary's really in touch with the spirit world? For some, no amount of proof will ever be convincing. They are totally close to that possibility. But for other open-minded individuals, proof is possible. A Hungarian photographer named Tom Blue became a believer in 1970 when he was taking photos of Rosemary for the German magazine Spiegel. During the session, Rosemary admitted to the other journalists present that Liz and her late mother were visible to her in the room. Blue asked Liz the question in German, a language Rosemary didn't understand. Rosemary said that Liz nodded to her and answered, "Ja," which means yes. Then, according to Rosemary, Liz said in English, "I'm going to fetch someone." He left the room. A few seconds later he returned. "He's back now," explained Rosemary to Blue and the other journalist. "He's brought a woman with him." Rosemary went on to describe the woman in detail. "She's wearing a shawl and has very small feet," she added. Blue's eye whitened. "You've just described my mother. I've always felt bad that I wasn't with her when she died," he said. "Now, I feel better about it." Later, Blue wrote to Rosemary, "I was moved and stirred by what occurred. You gave me a description so stricken and convincing that I can't forget it." How could Rosemary have known what Tom Blue's dead mother looked like? She had never met him before that day in 1970. Did Rosemary really communicate with the famous composers of the past? Tom Blue thinks so. Many believe Rosemary herself is talent behind the music, not Liszt or Beethoven. Until there is more definite proof, the story of Rosemary Brown remains a strange, unsolved mystery. A mother's warning. The American crew of the B-29 bomber was returning to their base in England during the last years of World War II. This long-range bomber was the largest and heaviest airplane of the war. Its payload of 20,000 pounds of bombs had been successfully dropped deep in the heart of the enemy territory. Most of the crew of 12 were asleep after the enemy raid. Only the pilot and co-pilot stayed awake to guide the B-29 home after the mission. The night skies were clear of German fighter planes, but the pilots kept their eyes peeled for the enemy. If they were attacked, their 13 machine guns and 20mm cannon could blow any speedy fighter out of the sky. The young tail gunner was sound asleep in his revolving turret at the rear of the big bomber. In his dream, he suddenly saw his mother. She was standing on the wingtip of the plane, dressed in a long, white robe that blew in the wind. "Mom," the young corpseman said in his dream, "what are you doing here? You died 3 years ago. You're not even alive." "Son, wake up," she called to him. "Danger is very near. Wake up. You must wake up." The young flyer stirred in his sleep. His mother's voice echoed in his brain. "Wake up. Wake up." Suddenly, the tail gunner awoke with a start. "Mom," he whispered. He realized the image of his mother had only been a dream. But just then, he spotted a German fighter plane right above the B-29. The pilots would never have seen it from where they were seated. "Wake up, everyone," the tail gunner screamed over his microphone, bent it at 12 o'clock high. "He appears to be alone. Rise and shine, boys. Let's give the German Artel a big army corps welcome." Although the Spitty Me-109 had 2 cannons and 2 machine guns, the lone German pilot wasn't prepared for the firepower that suddenly knocked them out of the sky. "This is a message from my mother," said the tail gunner as he fired burst after burst at the enemy plane, which fell to the earth in flames. If his mother hadn't appeared in his dream to warn and wake him, the B-29 would have been a sitting duck. Are there limits to a mother's love? Did this woman come back from the dead to warn her son of danger? Or was it just coincidence that he dreamed of her at the exact moment? The young tail gunner was convinced that his mother saved his life and the lives of the crew. How else would you explain it? The ghost of West Point. "The Thayer place is haunted," declared the mayor. "Strange things happen here." The year was 1972, and Ed and Lorraine Warren had been invited to speak to the cadets at West Point. The Warrens were demonologists, experts on the supernatural and the occult. The major was giving them a tour of the U.S. Military Academy. Their first stop had been the white-painted brick Thayer residence. It's named for Colonel Sylvanus Thayer, who was West Point superintendent from 1817 to 1833, the major explained. "Our current superintendent lives here now. People have seen some unusual things at the house," he continued. "The beds are mysteriously turned down, and when they are made up, some invisible force turns them down again." He then led the Warrens into the kitchen. "See that wet spot on the breadboard? Whenever we dry it up, it keeps coming back over and over again. It's been that way for months," the major said. "The superintendent and his wife have seen things at night, and so have their guests. Doors slam and clothes are torn and ripped out of drawers," he added. Lorraine could feel evidence of the supernatural at the Thayer house. There were troublesome spirits in the air. In one of the rooms, Lorraine sat in a rocking chair and detected the presence of former President John F. Kennedy. She mentioned this to the major. "JFK stayed in this room when he visited West Point," the major replied. In the master bedroom, Lorraine felt the angry spirit of a strong woman who always got her way. A jealous, possessive spirit who felt the house belonged to her and resented anybody else who lived in it, Lorraine declared. When Lorraine told the major, he said that General Douglas MacArthur's wife had also lived in the Thayer house at one time. She ran the place with an iron hand, and the servants were afraid of her. That explains why the beds were always turned down and why the clothes were tossed around, said the major. But Lorraine sensed something else in the house. She believed some violent act had happened in or had been connected with the house in some as the cadets they were preparing to leave West Point, Lorraine glanced out the window and saw a ghostly figure of a man looking at her. He wore an old-fashioned uniform from the past, with no brains or insignia of any kind. Somehow, he was able to communicate with Lorraine. He said his name was Greer, and he was not free. Lorraine told one of the military aides accompanying them, but the name was not familiar to the young aide. A week later, Lorraine received a phone call. It was from the aide from the academy. "Mrs. Warren, I did some research on the man named Greer," he told her. "He attended West Point around the turn of the century and murdered another man, but he was cleared by a military court and absolved of blame. So why is his spirit so troubled?" "Well, we'll never really know the answer," explained Lorraine. "Perhaps he can't accept what happened and is still angry at himself." Once the officials at West Point knew who all the ghosts were, they became less frightened and even more intrigued by their ghostly companions. Dandy. The boy and his sister knew that their dog, Dandy, was devoted to them. He was a large and powerful retriever, trained as a gun dog for hunting. Sometimes Dandy acted so smart, he almost seemed human. Boy and dog went everywhere together. The boy was an expert duck and bird hunter, and bicycled for miles around the beautiful English countryside to pursue his favorite sport. Up at dawn, the boy and his dog spent their days traveling over the hills and throughout the swamps and the grasslands. Dandy swam through the water and ran across the marshlands and fields. He loved to retrieve game for his beloved master. Arriving home, Dandy would run and play with the boy's sister, or sometimes just snap at her feet. He felt peaceful and content as a familiar and loving hand stroked his muscular back. As the years went by, the boy and the girl grew up and began spending less and less time with Dandy, but the dog was still devoted to them. Whenever the young man came home, the dog would accompany the family to the train station. When the train came in, Dandy would run back and forth across the platform. As soon as he recognized his master, he would jump on his hind legs and grab the hat off the young man's head. Then, Dandy would trot home next to the car, hat in mouth, while the neighbors looked on with amusement. One day, Dandy didn't come to the train station to meet the young man. When the master got home, he found that his devoted dog was very sick and couldn't walk. Dandy was dying. For weeks during the winter, he had been retrieving sticks in the river. Then, night after night, he was mistakenly shut in the stable by the caretaker, soaking wet and without food. The young man was heartbroken to see his ill dog. He held him close, whispering words of love and comfort to his pet. Dandy died that night in his master's arm. At the same time, the man's sister was in London, fast asleep in her room. Suddenly, she awoke as a large dog jumped onto her bed. The young woman switched on a small lamp next to the bed and saw Dandy. "Dandy boy," she said with delight, "what are you doing here?" She reached out to hug him and licked her cheek. As she started to close her arms around the big dog, she suddenly found that she was hugging nothing but an empty space. "Well, of course he can't be here," she said to herself. "I must be dreaming." The young woman looked at her clock to see what time it was. She tried to go back to sleep, but was too restless and worried. Something must be wrong at home, she thought to herself. The next morning, the young woman contacted her brother. She discovered that Dandy had died during the night, at the very same time he had appeared in her room. "I smelled Dandy. I felt his tongue on my cheek," she told her brother. Did the spirit of Dandy come in to see his beloved mistress one last time, or was it just her imagination? "He came to say goodbye to me," she